If you ever board a train after midnight and the seats are already warm, do not sit down, because the last passengers never got off. Amir had worked late again. By the time he reached the station, the city had already gone to sleep. His phone was dead, no one to call, no way home, just the long, empty night ahead of him. It was 3 a.m. He had missed every train that night, except the one that wasn't supposed to exist. The station clock had stopped at 3:33, frozen, as if time itself was afraid to move forward here. Then it came. The train stopped right in front of him. The doors opened on their own, and inside, dozens of people sat perfectly still. Something was wrong with it. The wheels dripped a black liquid, and the air around it turned freezing cold. Something told him to run, but the cold was unbearable, so he stepped inside. The door shut behind him with a deafening slam. Every seat was taken, but not a single person looked at him. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe, they just waited. He walked slowly down the aisle. Their faces were gray like old photographs, and as he passed, one of their fingers twitched. Then it happened. One by one, their heads began to turn. Slowly, silently, all of them, following him. There was only one empty seat left, but the cushion was frozen solid, as if someone invisible had just stood up from it. Against every instinct he sat down. The cold bit through his clothes like teeth, and the moment he sat, everything went silent. The old woman beside him slowly turned. Her eyes were sewn shut, yet somehow she was looking right at him. She leaned closer and whispered 3 words that froze his blood. "You're late. Again." Again? He had never seen this train before in his life, but deep down, a memory he didn't have began to surface. A memory flickered in his mind. Himself, younger, stepping onto this very train. But that was impossible, wasn't it? He pulled out his ticket, but the name printed on it wasn't a stranger's, it was his own, dated 30 years ago. He looked out the window. There were no stations, no cities, only an endless graveyard rushing past in the dark. And in that graveyard, a tall figure stood watching the train pass, watching him, waiting for him to come back to the soil. Then the conductor appeared. His uniform was rotting, and beneath his cap, there was no face at all. As he walked, every passenger lowered their head in fear. Even the dead were terrified of him. "Tickets," it rasped, in a voice like grinding bones. Everyone must pay for the journey they forgot. Amir searched his pockets in panic, but his ticket had crumbled to dust, and the conductor was already reaching for him. The skeletal hand reached into his chest. He felt something being pulled out of him, his warmth, his life, his very soul. With a scream, he tore himself free and ran. But the dead were no longer still. They reached for him from every side. He ran. But the aisle had no end, and from every seat, cold grey hands clawed at his clothes, his arms, his face. He threw open the door to the next carriage, but it was the same one, the same faces, the same eyes. There was no escape. Door after door after door, each one darker than the last. The train was endless, a prison with no way out. Then he saw a little girl standing alone. She looked up at him with black, weeping eyes and whispered, "Don't let him take you too." She took his cold hand in hers. "Come with me," she whispered. "I know the way out, but we must hurry before he notices." She pointed to a door at the very end of the train. "That's the only way out," she said, "but you must not look back." He ran toward the door with everything he had. Behind him, the screams grew louder. The whole train was waking up. Every passenger rose at once. Their mouths opened into a single deafening scream that shook the entire train. Suddenly, the shadows seized the little girl. "Run!" she screamed, as the darkness swallowed her whole. "Don't stop, run!" His fingers touched the handle, but just then, a freezing hand closed around his throat and began to pull him back. With his last breath, he shoved the door open. A blinding light poured in, and the dead screamed and pulled away. He fell through the door into nothing. The screams faded, the cold disappeared, and then, silence. He woke up gasping on the cold platform. The sun was rising. It was over. It had all just been a nightmare, or so he thought. He laughed in relief. He was alive. He was safe. He told himself it was just a bad dream and started walking home. But as he passed the station window, his reflection didn't follow. It just sat there inside the train, smiling back at him. Then he felt it. On his wrist. A frozen handprint. The mark of the conductor. He hadn't escaped. He'd been let go. For now. On the ground lay an old newspaper. The headline read, "Night train vanishes with 87 passengers 30 years ago today." And in the photograph of the missing passengers, It was his own face. He had been on that train all along. He always had been. He dropped the paper and stumbled back. "No," he whispered. "This isn't real. I'm alive. I have to be alive." He ran home through the empty streets. But there were no people, no cars, no sound. The whole world felt abandoned. He stopped. There was no one, anywhere. It was as if the whole world had vanished, leaving only him and the fog. Finally he reached his house. The door was open, and from inside he could hear a voice, his mother's voice, calling his name. But inside everything was rotting, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if no one had lived there for 30 long years. He touched the furniture he grew up with, all of it rotted, all of it dead. "How long was I gone?" he whispered to the silence. On the wall hung an old family photo, his mother, his father, and himself, but his face had been scratched out completely. As he stared, the scratched face began to bleed, and a cold voice behind him whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." Then he saw her, his mother, pale, hollow, and dead. "I've been waiting 30 years, my son," she whispered. "Welcome home." He screamed and backed away. This wasn't his mother. This was something wearing her face, and it was getting closer. Her face cracked open like glass, and underneath was the conductor. It had worn his mother's face all along, just to lure him home. Suddenly a train whistle screamed in the distance. The walls cracked open, and the headlights of the night train burned through the windows. The house melted away around him. The walls became seats. The floor became the aisle. He had never left the train at all. An invisible force gripped him and dragged him backward. The train had come to collect what belonged to it. He clawed at the floor, his nails tearing into the wood. But it was useless. The dark swallowed him whole. And then he was back, in his seat, his skin turning grey, his eyes going empty. He had finally become one of them. A single tear froze on his cheek as the last of his humanity slipped away. He could still think, still feel, but he could no longer move. The conductor placed a cold hand on his shoulder. "You always come back," it whispered. "You always do." Now he understood. Every passenger here was once like him, a traveler, a victim, trapped on a journey that would never, ever end. The train rolled on through the endless dark. The same journey, the same passengers, searching for a station that never comes. His face now joined the others at the window, watching, waiting, hoping someone someday would finally set him free. Years later, another traveler stood on that same platform at 3 a.m., tired, alone, and then he saw a light in the distance. He was exhausted. He just wanted to get home. He never noticed how cold the air had become, or that the clock read 3:33. The train arrived. The doors opened, and inside, among the frozen faces pressed against the glass, one of them was screaming, trying to warn him. Amir screamed against the glass with all his might. "Don't get on, run, run!" But no sound came out. No one could hear the dead. But the new traveler couldn't hear him. He stepped inside. The door shut, and the cycle began again. He sat down in a warm, empty seat. He felt the cold creep in, and somewhere deep inside, he too began to forget who he used to be. So the next time you board a train after midnight, and the seats are already warm, remember, Amir, and pray it's not your turn next. The last train never stops. It's only waiting for you. Subscribe if you dare to survive the next ride.